Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It is Justin Collery. I am here. I'm joined with my ever-vested co-host, Frank Prendergast. Frank, hello, welcome to 2025. We are back at our usual slot. Things are returning to normal. We think we're settling down, settling into 2025.
AI
Welcome to
isn't settling down, though, by the looks of things.
no, it's taking off. Actually, Sam Altman was being interviewed this week, and he was asked about his views on this slow takeoff versus a fast takeoff. And he said that he was reevaluating his timelines and he was going for a fast takeoff. So things were getting faster from his point of view. I don't know. Everything that these people say, I take them with a grain of salt. I believe it when I see it. But there's a lot going on, that's for
Yeah,
sure, right?
massive.
So let's just dive straight into it, okay? And we're
Yeah,
going to look first at OpenAI. So OpenAI released what they said was their economic blueprint this week. So to give a little bit of context around this, Sam Altman and OpenAI, as part of their mission, feel that it's part of their job to educate people and to educate the world as to what the dawn of AGI means and how this is going to impact people. So it's not just to create product; they also have a mandate on themselves to educate people and to raise awareness of the technology. So to that end, they've released their economic blueprint. And I'm going to ask you for your thoughts, but I'm going to quote one line which confused me, excited me, and got me thinking about what they were talking about. Right. So the line that they put in here, and it's towards the top, was shared prosperity is as near and measurable as the new jobs and growth that will come from building more AI infrastructure like data centers, chip manufacturing facilities, and power plants. So there's a couple of things, right, that sort of I questioned about that line. Really, sometimes you read something and there's one line that just sort of sticks in your head. You're
yeah,
going, what exactly are they saying there? Right?
yeah,
Because this seems like an important line. So the first, everybody was getting excited about that shared prosperity is near, and that's pretty exciting, right? It's near.
yeah.
Um, and it's as near as the new jobs that will be created from building AI infrastructure, which is something that you think is going to happen soon, like this year, next year. So it seems like the shared prosperity is tangible within touching distance. But they go list this, and then I'm thinking, does that mean they're the only jobs? Like, is there going to be no jobs after we've built all the AI infrastructure? Is that like, I don't know. What were your thoughts on the economic blueprint?
Yeah, it's funny because I probably would have glossed over that line, except that you pointed it out to me. I probably would have glossed over it and kind of reading it and just going, yeah, 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 good AI is going to bring all good things, But
It is.
it is interesting when you look at it because they're saying the shared prosperity is as near and measurable as the new jobs and growth that come from building the infrastructure and data centers. So, like, yeah, the two things are completely separate, but they don't explain where the shared prosperity comes from if it's not from those other things that they mention. And this is my big problem with this economic blueprint is that they just throw these things around like shared prosperity without explaining how we're going to achieve it, or raising the possibility that it means completely restructuring our society as we know it. So
Yeah, I
it
know.
just reminds me, I think it was Zuckerberg who was it Zuckerberg had an open letter last year, and this sounds very, very similar to me. This to me sounds like, give us everything we need right now in terms of infrastructure and data center and get all of the roadblocks out of our way because we need to do this to give you this shared prosperity that we're promising, that we're being really nebulous about how it actually happens.
Oh, Frank, you're so cynical. You are so cynical. Okay, so there's a couple of interesting things. I think that's so funny, right? So there was a point. I think it's important because I think that all the big labs know how to get to the end goal, to this shared prosperity. And I mean, in this economic blueprint, again, the boogeyman of China pops out, which is we need to make sure that the US is number one. We don't want to let those nasty Chinese people get ahead of us, right? But behind that, I think there's a real fear, right? So I was discussing with you just before we came on air, right? There's these three things that are coming together, and it's explained really clearly. So we have these three paradigms. So first, we had the paradigm of increased pre-training. So your jump from GPT-3 to GPT-4, that was really obvious, right? Throw more compute at the problem and your models will get smarter. Then we had this new paradigm of post-training. So give it time to think. And that was like the jump from O1 to O3. And that's the one that we saw before Christmas, getting 88% on the ARC AGI, or 78% on ARC AGI, and 79% on software problems, and so on. And then what we've seen, and more of it again this week, is models getting smaller and smaller. So you can take a model which is now 10% the size of a model that we had 12 months ago, but it performs, it's just as capable. If you had any one of those things, you would say, oh, I've got 12 months of progress to go. But I think what the big companies are seeing is we have 3 levers now to play with, and they're all equally powerful, right? So we seem to reach a limit on the pre-training, and now we have 2 other. We've got distillation and we've got post-training to work with. And if you remember, like my example is when the telephone was invented, 2 people invented it at the same time. It wasn't one person. That happens a lot, right? It's in the zeitgeist, and people think about this stuff. And I think that Google know what they need to do, and I think OpenAI need to know what they need to do. To get to AGI and beyond, right? I think they think they can do it this year, right? And I think they know what they need to do, and X probably knows what to do, and Meta knows what to do, which means the Chinese know what they know, and they also know, but they just do, right? Because they'll have people in there working there and so on, and they've got their own brilliant researchers working on it at the same time. And we have this other thing which we saw, which was that by constraining the GPU powers that you're giving to the Chinese, it's just forcing them to be more inventive and better engineers, and they're training models that are just as good with less horsepower. So they're going to get there anyway. And so it's a real race, right? It's important. It matters that you clear, as you say, clear the barriers. Give us the infrastructure, because the technically we know what to do here. That's the problem now is not how do we do it. The problem now is how quickly can we do it. So we need to speed it along. So I'm on Zuckerberg's side, and I'm not as cynical as you, Frank.
Yeah, I mean, if I think I'm just going to be like doubly cynical now and say, you mentioned like, that there's a real fear there, and whose fear is that? And I wonder, is the timing of this economic blueprint and the phraseology of this economic blueprint, is it simply a political maneuver? Because there's a new president about to be sworn in, and this is who they're going to need to remove the roadblocks if possible. And this type of phraseology is the type of phraseology that I think will get somebody fired up to, like all that stuff about like, oh, there's billions of dollars waiting to be invested in AI globally, and if we don't create the infrastructure to be able to take it, then it'll go to the Chinese. I mean, I think it's bizarre in an economic blueprint document that be like such a huge focus.
And to give you a very interesting historical viewpoint on this. So when was the printing press invented? It's a couple of hundred years ago. And this is fascinating, right? So Europe was just a patchwork of baronets and little fiefdoms and so on, and many of them run by churches. And in some of those, they welcomed the printing press, and they made sure that there was a printing press in their town. And then there was other ones, particularly the more religious ones, they banned the printing press and said they're not allowed, right? Because it could spread heresy, like different types of religion and God knows what else. That was hundreds of years ago. If you look at an economic map of Europe today, and you look at where there is more and less successful towns and villages, I mean, there's not huge differences, but you can still see it maps very well with the towns that banned the printing press and the towns that didn't. And it was interesting. Yeah, it's true. And in this thing here, it's not as good an example, but they use the example of horses and cars. And when the car was invented in the UK, they had this idea that somebody should be in front of them with a red flag, and in the US they embraced the car, and that gave the US a competitive advantage. And I think that's true. And this is the same. And so you can be cynical about it, Or you can be positive about it and say, look, this is brand new technology. It's going to transform the world. We
Yeah.
need to jump on this train.
It's hard not to be cynical about it when this document appears to be saying, we need. They don't just come out and say we need regulation, but that appears to be what it's saying. They're talking about how, there are very clear rules about the development or the manufacture and use of cars, and we need something similar for AI. And yet, any regulation that actually comes up, they seem to be against. So it's hard not to be cynical about these documents when you're reading one thing being said, but you're seeing a totally different action being taken in the real world.
Frank, what one hand is about to give it, the other hand is about to take it away. So I totally disagree with you on that, right? On the cynical side of this document. However, to your point, there was another story that came up this week, and I'm going to have to say that you're right. So it was very interesting. So there was a story emerged this week where Meta are being sued for using copyrighted material in order to train their biggest models. And this is going to court at the moment, and the court documents are being released. So we're starting to see the emails that went between the different employees in Meta, and they're discussing what internet data they should use to train their models. And it's very fascinating. I mean, it's really interesting to read the internal workings of another company, right? That's always kind of, I don't know, if you're kind of nosy, it's kind of interesting. But what's interesting is that this has totally been driven from the top, the leadership. So the program managers and the worker bees that are training the models, they were not keen on using, there was a particular library called LibGen, which they knew had copyrighted material in it. And they were keen not to use this particular library, but they also said, look, if we don't use it, it's a huge amount of data. Our model isn't going to be as good as a result. It went all the way up to Mark Zuckerberg, and Mark Zuckerberg said, you were to use that library, right? So it came from the very top to use it, which is very interesting, right? Here's where you're right, though. When they discussed the risks and the pros and cons of using the library, one of the biggest risks they outlined, European regulation.
Right.
So you were right. Okay, regulation does work in like, I don't think it's right. It's such a fuzzy area. Like, I mean, is it okay to use copyrighted material to train the models? It's still for me an open question. I can see the arguments against it, and yet I can also see the bigger, the greater good argument for it, saying, yeah, look at it, it's they're not reproducing it, they're just using it to create something new. So whatever, we're not going to go into that now. But it is interesting that the regulations do have an impact on people's decisions. So at that level, I do, that's okay for me to have that regulation. There's one regulation I'll give you.
Great. This is a huge win on the AI argument. This is a massive, this is a massive milestone in our series of podcasts in lives. I think this needs to be marked and celebrated.
Mark the time.
As a little aside on the whole Meta court case thing, I spotted what I thought was quite an interesting article about one of their lawyers, and let me just find what he actually said. So this lawyer quit. He basically fired them as a client. He was a California attorney called Mark Lemley, and he dropped them as a client. In a high-profile copyright case. Now, I assume it's the same case. I didn't actually.
It's the same case, yeah.
But he dropped them not because he changed his mind about the copyright dispute or anything like that. He actually said that he still believes them to be on the right side of the copyright dispute, which is interesting. He still thinks that they were perfectly legally entitled to use the copyrighted material. What he said, though, was he was dropping them because of Mark Zuckerberg's, and this is a quote, descent into toxic masculinity and neo-Nazi madness.
Really?
Really.
That's incredible.
So, because Mark Zuckerberg's been out there on podcasts talking about like masculine energy and how important it is, and I don't know, I don't tune into it, but and he's also been dismantling a load of like DEI initiatives and stuff within Meta. He's also been, I think they've been getting rid of the third-party fact checkers. And so, yeah.
Only in Europe. Or sorry, no, they kept them in Europe, sorry. Only in the US.
Right. Okay. Right. Yeah. So
Interesting.
I just thought that was interesting.
It is interesting because Mark Zuckerberg has basically done, as many people in the US, this sort of feeds into your cynicism, it have done a complete vault of face. So, they were all happy, lovey for the last, maybe since Obama, I guess, for that sort of, since that period. And they've completely turned around. And Zuckerberg, I remember we talked about Zuckerberg before and how impressive it was that he was able to, what had they done? They'd done the metaverse or something that was just a disaster. And he was able to switch that thing and say, right, we're not doing that. We're doing something else instead. And he turned an enormous company really quickly, technically. But now he's changing it culturally as well. And yeah, we'll see how he gets on with that. It's a dangerous thing to do. Culture is changing in a lot of, let's just talk a little bit about culture in big companies. So a Meta this week came out and said that they were planning to not hire any mid-level developers this year, and instead they wanted to use AI to do their mid-level. Salesforce also came out this and said they were not going to hire any developers this year. They were going to get AI. In fact, I think they were hoping to have natural attrition, have less developers by the end of the year through natural attrition, and that the increase in productivity just through AI was going to make up for the shortfall. Now, I mean, to me, again, this comes down, it's for me, it's all linked. I'm sort of turning, that meme, right, from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where you've got Charlie with all the red lines and
Yeah.
That's my brain at the moment,
Yeah.
right? And I'm going, right, the economic blueprint, these people saying, right, it's all, this next year is going to be very consequential if, all these things are true. So it's fascinating. Those people, by the way, are very highly paid. Mid-level engineer in Meta could be making 250, 300 grand. Those are the people that I think they're hoping to get. He's also fired 10% of them.
Right.
This week. He's done. What was your name? The name of the guy? He was a terrible fellow. Jack Welch was a famous CEO in the 80s, and he used to fire 10% of his workforce every year. The bottom performing one, and Zuckerberg started doing that as well.
Right.
We're actually going back to the 80s, Frank. In every respect. Next thing, it's going to be okay to slap women on their bums and to make sort of sexist remarks and stuff.
Yeah. I was about to say something, and then we'd quickly become a political show and not an AI show. So let's not even go there. But let's have a look. There was a couple of things that caught my eye. Again, we joked a lot of last year. We joked about how this was just becoming the OpenAI show because everything was about OpenAI.
Yes.
But then kind of towards the end of the year, we were like, oh my God, it's now Google. It's Google. Everything is Google. They're just doing amazing work. And that seems to be continuing in 2025. So a couple of things caught my eye. The biggest one, which I think is really a pretty massive news, is that Google are basically, so up until now, like I'm a Google Workspace user. And up until now, they've been pushing Gemini at me, but I have to pay like $20 extra per user to access all of the Gemini features. They're doing away with that now. They're going to just give Workspace users all of the Gemini stuff and just increase the Workspace fee, which when I heard that, I was like, oh no, that's not good because I want the choice. But actually, they're increasing the fee by $2. So now, instead of having to choose if I want this like $20 add-on, they're just saying, okay, we're upping Workspace by $2 and you're getting it. So I don't have a choice. But for $2, I'm getting $20 value for $2. So I'm pretty happy.
What are we getting for the $2, Frank? Because I think I'm a Workspace user as well, even though I never use it.
Anything that was in the Gemini, I think what did they call it? The Gemini Professional or something, I think it was called. So anything that was in that $20 add-on is now just going to be in Workspace automatically.
Wow.
And even things like all of the free version of Notebook LM, for example. And I'm going to get these numbers wrong, but I think in the free version of Notebook LM you had like 25 documents you could add, but in the paid version you had like 50 documents could be added. So I now have access to the 50 documents, stuff like that. And I think this is massive because like I had a poor experience very, very, very early on with Gemini. And so they kept pushing Gemini at me, and I was like, well, I'm paying for ChatGPT. I'm not going to pay for Gemini as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Particularly given that I had a poor experience early on. But that was very early on. And, you know, they've come on in like huge leaps and bounds. And now I'm going to just have access to Gemini. So very, very quickly, it's going to become the reverse for me. It's going to become the question, hang on, should I really still be paying for ChatGPT if I now have access to this within Google Workspace? So that's, I mean, for me personally, that's going to be a really interesting question to answer. And I think a lot of people are going to be posing that question to themselves.
I know. And we're in for such an incredible year, because we're going to have O3 released at the end of the month. You're making that, you're thinking about that right now. Like, oh God, what I done? And then OpenAI are going to come out with O3, and you're going to go, oh, I can't get rid of that. I have to hold on to it for O3, and you're going to use it for a while.
Yeah.
And then Google are going to be like, okay, and they're going to bring out. So you're going to go, oh no, I'm going to go back to Google, and that's going to be our year.
Yeah.
Of, you know, just going over and back. It's so interesting on that. You saw spotted something else, which I think is mind-blowing. And it wasn't Google. I think it was Microsoft did it. They came out with this thing called MatterGen.
Oh yeah, I don't know who was behind that actually, but that was crazy sci-fi stuff to me anyway.
Yeah.
Where it's basically, it's like Midjourney, where you say, you know, create an image of whatever. But in this instance, it is designed for matter. So you might think to yourself, okay, you know what? How do we create a wine glass that doesn't shatter when you drop it on tiles? And you go to MatterGen and you say, imagine a stronger glass for me. And it goes off and tries to figure out how to create an entirely new matter that is glass-like but doesn't shatter when you drop it on tiles. Mind-blowing. Absolutely mind-blowing.
Unbelievable. Can you imagine? Now, I'd be very interested to see. It's only just been published. It is Microsoft that are bringing it out. But can you imagine, like, you could give me a solar cell that's more efficient. Give me a car material that's lighter and doesn't go on fire. Give me a building material that's a better insulator. Give me, you know, potentially, you know, it's really brilliant. I would love to know. I mean, I saw the videos, and it seems to manipulate, you know, molecules and atoms and things at that sort of level to create those materials. If you could hook it up to a 3D printer that could manufacture those materials, I mean, you're at Star Trek. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
make me a cup of tea. I mean,
Yeah. And,
almost, you know.
and the other crazy sci-fi thing is straight out of Star Trek as well. Was Meta AI have now come up with this new translator, which it can do speech-to-speech translation in, I think, 100 languages, and it doesn't need to convert anything into text. So it can do just immediate speech-to-speech, because most of these things go speech, text, and then back to speech. This is just direct speech-to-speech, and apparently, compared to other like state-of-the-art translation tools, it's 23% more accurate. So again, that is like, wasn't the Star Trek translator, wasn't that?
Yeah, Universal Translator. The Babelfish from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was a famous one in the 80s. Yet again, we're going back to the 80s, but the stuff is real.
They actually referenced Babelfish specifically in the paper they released about it. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
That's brilliant. But tell me this, why is there, I mean, it's such a simple thing, right? But why is there any movies in foreign still on Netflix? Like, why don't I just turn on Netflix, and even though it's in Spanish, I'm listening to it in English, and they could just do it in real time and record it so that you don't have to do it all the time. Like, that seems like a really obvious, simple use case. Like, let's go. Think of all the brilliant French movies you could watch.
Well, you do know you can still watch them, right?
I don't understand the word French. I'm useless at French.
Yeah, I mean, I think just a matter of time, and I don't know how much time, but I mean that's just coming. There's no way that's not coming. Definitely.
Unbelievable. And to take you back to my sort of where I started off today with, which is we have three things which are coming together, which is why all the people are saying we're on a fast takeoff. Just today there was a new speech model I made called Kokoro. Did you come across Kokoro during the week?
No, I didn't until you mentioned it to me, and I really want to know how to access it, because I'm still on my quest to find a model that can handle my accent.
Oh, so I don't think Kokoro. I don't know that Kokoro will mimic your accent yet.
Oh, it's not a cloner.
It's not a cloner. It's
Okay.
just a voice model, kind of similar to what you're talking about. So it'll talk in different languages and it'll have nice
Okay.
speech, right?
Right.
And whatever. But it's not yet going to clone you. I believe it could, right? I'm sure they're going to get there, but not yet.
So it's more like ChatGPT voice mode.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Right. What's amazing about it though is normally these models have like billions of parameters, right? They're very, very big. This one has 82 million with an M. It's tiny. You could nearly fit it on a 3.5-inch floppy disk. That's how small it is, right? It's just so small. And the quality of it.
Come back to the 80s, aren't you?
It's the theme. Today is the 80s day. Let's just go with it. So yeah, it's 82 million parameters. It's just way smaller than anything else. It's an example of distillation, and the quality out of it, amazing. Now in that one, they only had for that one, I think they had 6 or 10 sample voices that you could choose from, but state of the art, brilliant, amazing, love it. Another example of distillation. That's why we're on a faster takeoff.
I want to jump back to Google again just for a second, because there was another one, and I'd love to know if you came across this, and if you didn't, actually maybe you could have a look at it and maybe come back to us with the technical perspective next week. But I saw that Google also, so LLMs are built on the transformer architecture, which I think was a Google invention in the first place, and now they have this new architecture called Titans. Did you come across this? So it basically just gives some. It would still be LLMs, so it would still presumably have a lot of the. I don't think it's going to get over things like hallucinations and stuff like that, but it will help hugely in terms of long-term memory and context windows, and it has various other benefits that are shortcomings of transformers. And I'm still trying to figure out how big a deal that is.
Okay, I read the paper briefly. I had a scan through it. It looks really good, right? It does exactly what you say. It talks about memory, and if you want to have long context windows, it solves a lot of problems around long context windows and all that sort of stuff. So it looks really interesting. There definitely will be new ideas, technical ideas to come along that are better than transformers. I know that for sure, because if you look at the human brain, or whatever, we're better at capturing and processing information still, right, than an LLM is. And eventually LLMs will be better through different technologies or architectures. My big thing though is with all the competition that's happening, right, between OpenAI and stuff, they've released this paper. I think if they discovered transformers today, or attention is all you need, that was the big paper back in 2017, I don't think they'd publish it. There's too much competition. And so the competition is, in this instance, kind of the enemy of innovation of that type. It's the end of the academic era, and now it's the commercial era. And so what you're seeing in that paper is stuff that they don't think is terribly useful, or that is old. And so it's interesting. And it just goes to show that there's going to be more developments. There was one of the guys from OpenAI tweeted this week, a very obtuse tweet, but was basically talking about how they had created in essence, what the tweet was saying was that they had created a self-improving model in a sandbox. So it was contained, but it was improving itself. And if you remember from the 12 Days of Christmas, one of the guys in the 12 Days of Christmas mentioned, next time we should get it to improve himself. And Sam Altman shut him down like a ton of bricks, told him to shut the hell up. Don't ever talk about that again, And I think the guy is still in the hole. He's probably spent 50 days in solitary, And so I think there is going to be new architectures. And I wonder, is it going to, I think it could be an LLM that comes up with the architecture that succeeds the LLM, which is kind of fascinating and poetic in a certain way. So it's interesting. But is it the next big thing? There was some other thing a year or two ago, and it wasn't the next big thing. These things do get talked about, from time to time.
And I definitely want to have a quick chat about OpenAI released a new feature in ChatGPT, the tasks feature, which, it sounded really exciting. I saw the headlines and I was like, ooh, amazing. Because it was saying, I was saying something like the headlines were the usual kind of sensationalist stuff, and saying that OpenAI had entered into the agentic age. And I thought, wow, what does it do? And not much is the answer. I think somebody a little bit more measured described it as scheduled prompts. So I'm still trying to figure out. I mean, I'm still trying to figure out what I would use a scheduled prompt for. So I tested it out, and sure enough, I was able to get it to, I said something like, at 10:30 a.m. Eastern time, please do a search on the web for any news related to Google Gemini. And sure enough, it did it. But it just does it in that chat window. So you can change your notifications so that you get notified, I think, in the app or notified in your browser. I wasn't actually able to get it to do that, but I just need to look at my settings with it a little bit closer. It does send you an email when it does the task, but it doesn't include the message in the email. The email just says your task has been completed. Click here to view the chat. So that's not massively, useful either. What did you think of tasks?
I think tasks is the very first version of something that's going to become bigger. So OpenAI do things, they float balloons, right? So the GPT store was clearly a balloon, and it's been a lead balloon, and it's going down, right? It's dead. I think this is going to be a bigger one, and maybe this is a balloon. I hope it isn't. It feels to me like something that's going to be part of something bigger. So let me give you some examples. I think it's just a toy thing at the moment, but let's say you had a podcast that talked about AI news, right? And stuff like that. It would be cool if you had an agent that on a Thursday evening, let's say all during the week was just collecting interesting stories and tweets and news and stuff like that. And then of a Thursday evening was able to distill it for you and put it into, say, okay, here's the top 20 things. Here's a couple of funny stories. Here's a couple of nice stories, and gave it to you. That would be super useful, right?
Yeah.
And it's not there yet, but it can get there, right?
Yeah.
So that's the first iteration that I think, it could improve on. And the second iteration that I think will be very useful then is, at the moment, it's the input is your prompt. You have told it to do this. But if you changed it so that the input is something environmental or something technical or something, whatever, then it truly becomes something useful.
Yeah.
So, okay, and I can't think of all the great ideas now, but as a simple idea, like, look at, if I could turn around to ChatGPT and say, look, every time I'm in the house and, it's less than 16 degrees, could you turn on the heating for a bit and just warm me up? And I never have to think about it again, right? Can you remind me in every second week to put out my recycling bin and every other week to put out my normal bin? Could you just look after that for me, please? But then it starts to become something a bit more useful. And it's only just a little bit more than what it's got at the moment. And then you can imagine people in businesses doing stuff that's, that's very simple. You end up with, it's kind of like a theory of ants, where you've got lots of like very simple actions, but when you put them all together, then they start to create something that's a bit more complicated.
Yeah.
So you can imagine in a business, you can imagine saying, well, if a stock market is the obvious one, which I don't think is a great example, but if the stock market goes down, sell everything, and if it goes up, buy everything, or whatever. They'd have different. So you're being triggered, and you've got this sort of intelligent brain that looks at so it's not just a trigger, it's a trigger with an intelligent brain behind it. I think that's where it's going to go. Very interesting stuff, just not yet.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So there was two tiny things we could end on. One was you had spotted something about Apple.
Yes, good news for Apple. They've stopped using AI. I think it's good news.
Now, not entirely, surely.
All right. So I'll actually be serious. I do think it's kind of funny, and I am being serious. I think it is good news for Apple. Apple is going to be the poster child for every company, how they do not want to adopt AI and what you don't want to be like in the AI age. They're making a total hames of it. So they had created this service. It was driven by AI, and it gave you kind of what we just discussed, news stories, right? So it'll give you an AI news story. It totally hallucinated. It made up news stories. It was a mess. People were complaining about it. It gave them bad press. This is great news for Apple, because if you remember about 12 months ago, Google released some AI products, and they made a total hames of it as well. You could generate pictures of the royal family from the 1700s, and they'd all be brown or pink or purple or something like that, but they wouldn't look an awful lot like the royal family from the 1700s. And that gets people's attention, and people in senior management, say what you like about Zuckerberg and his masculinity, right? He has basically turned around to that organization and said, you are going to make the best goddamn AI that we can make on the planet. Go do it. And at the moment, Apple don't have that type of laser focus. They've got a slightly different focus. And so this is going to make Apple have laser focus on creating the best AI on the planet. So good news for us AI lovers and good news for Apple.
So you think this is going to be basically the kick in the behind that they need to take this seriously and sort it out?
Yep. It's great. Delighted for them.
Yeah. And the last thing that I just thought was a little bit of fun was, towards the end of the year, towards the end of 2024, we covered the feature that was added to Notebook LM, where you add in all your documents, it synthesizes it, it gives you, you can chat with it, but it also creates this, in inverted commas, podcast with 2 AI voices discussing the materials. And towards the end of 2024, they introduced a feature where you could now interrupt those podcast hosts. You could raise your hand and they would say, yes, what is it? And you could say, well, could you tell me a little bit more about that? Or, why did you say this? And the thing that I saw that was interesting was that apparently when they initially developed it, the podcast hosts were really annoyed at being interrupted.
No.
Yeah. And
that's brilliant.
And they would say just, the kind of like slightly tetchy things like, well, Frank, I was getting to that.
That is hilarious. That should be a dial. You should be able to turn that up and down. You should be able to have the snarkiest podcast hosts on the planet or the nicest, lovely, depending on your mood. That'd be brilliant crack.
So, and what was interesting as well, I thought, was that, they basically fixed it by tweaking the prompts that were related to the interruptions, because they weren't 100% sure exactly why it happened. But from reading the article, it seemed like whatever way that they had prompted them to handle the interruptions, there was something in that prompt that must have led them to believe that the interruptions were not necessarily a positive thing. So again, just kind of fascinating in terms of how careful you need to be with your prompting, because obviously there was nothing explicit in there about interruptions being negative, but whatever way the phrasing was, they think that it was just conveying that interruptions were not necessarily good. It's fascinating stuff. Amazing. But I'm like you, I think that would be a fun dial to have on them.
I think it'd be brilliant. Absolutely fantastic. Look forward to it. All right, Frank, we're up on time. Brilliant chat as always.
Amazing stuff. I will chat to you next week.
Look forward to it. We'll talk to you next week. Take it easy.